Okay. Oh, now it's counting down. Wow. Okay. It counts down to the countdown. Ah, all right. I believe it finally says we're live. Hello, everyone. It claims to still be struggling to load the comments. So, there we go. Okay, cool. So, hello. Um, it would be great to see some pings to see if people are here. Go ahead and say hi if you're taking a listen. I also want to mention, as a technical thing before we get into the meat of this, I've noticed in the last couple of lives I've done that when people watch these videos afterwards and then reply in the comments, I actually don't get the notifications for those comments unless I'm tagged. It works fine during live because I see it popping up on the side of the screen over here, so it's pretty straightforward. Hey Rupert, hey Marcello. So if you're watching this on replay and you want to reply and you want me to be sure to see your reply, make sure that you tag me, and then I'll be sure to see the response. Hey Ronnie. All right, so today I wanted to dig into a fairly practical tool that emerges from the whole space of things that I'm exploring and trying to share in this area. Hey Carissa. Yeah, it's really neat to see you live. Yeah, Rupert, I like that, like tagging my name. But like you don't need to do it while it's live. Like I'll just see these. I'll see the ones that are posted live during the video. Okay, so the general space, just to remind, to give context, and also to give context for people who may be seeing this stuff for the first time. Some of my first videos here. So what I am trying to do is articulate a space of insight, trying to make it a little bit more coherent, because I don't yet know how to say the whole thing coherently, but I see it coherently, about a way that we can engage with ourselves and the world and with each other in a way that I think actually has a good shot at addressing the issues that we are all facing individually, but also very much collectively. It seems to me that a lot of the causes of stuff like why we're in a pandemic, and also why there is all of this stuff about climate change, why there is political polarization, that whole space of kind of insanity where we seem to be, we as a species are much better at producing bad scenarios than we are at solving them. That general picture, I think, is understandable. I think the understanding is important. And there's a way of understanding it that I think opens a pathway to something really beautiful and good. I'm trying to figure out how to say that and share it. Not just because, I think I am right, but because I think there's enough chance that I'm seeing something right that if we compare notes and we look at it together, something that might actually be an answer can emerge. But rather than talking about this in the universal abstract, one thing I wanted to focus on today is one of the things that emerges from this that's very practical for individuals to work with. I'm going to change the light here so I'm not quite as blinded by the White House across the street. It's like blazing sunlight into my eyes. Okay, so there's this, when we're motivating ourselves, when we're trying to get ourselves to do things on a day-to-day basis, or week to week or month to month, we're trying to achieve goals. One of the things that keeps showing up because of the picture that I'm seeing, or I claim it's because of the picture that I'm seeing, is a very strong tendency to motivate ourselves based on some version of pain. It doesn't always look that way. So I'm going to give a bunch of examples so you can see the type of thing that I'm talking about. But in broad strokes, I described this in the text, but I want to sort of go over this maybe slightly differently, because things come out differently when I talk about them. In broad strokes, the issue is if the reason you're doing things is to get away from something bad, there isn't a clear direction to go towards. So the creativity of our minds focuses on any way to get away from the bad thing. This turns out to generate a whole lot of confusion, a lot of procrastination, a lot of dissociation from reality, a lot of bullshit, in the sense that I described bullshit last week, this tendency, this inclination to convince ourselves of conclusions independent of what is real, and to stop caring about what is real. So like this is a pretty systematic thing. It doesn't mean that this mode of drive is bad. Like, what would that mean? We better get away from that one. But it's that if you organize your entire psyche around it, then your psyche is systematically organized around shattering itself. Which I think the way that this gets experienced is having really stuck patterns that are unpleasant. Continuously dating the same problem over and over again, for instance, or having recurring thoughts of, I am such a loser, I'm a bad person, or having obsessions with things that you know aren't healthy for you, but you somehow can't pull yourself away from. And maybe even you rationalize, you decide, well, but it's good for me in these ways. Like, well, it's okay for me to drink a little bit in 5 to 6 glasses is like that's reasonable. Like the way that addictions form very often has this pattern that is designed like the way anything in evolution is designed. It emerges as a way to avoid a negative. And I promise I'm going to get a lot more concrete, but I want to give the big picture first. And there are many other manifestations. A lot of them are a lot more subtle. The sense that we have to do certain things because that's what being a good person is, or sometimes even more insidiously, there are certain things that are just practical. You don't want to do them, but you have to. Okay. This is a very common structure that emerges from a psyche that is arranged around avoiding negativity. I think there are some cases where avoiding negativity is the really natural way to organize a particular motive force. I think that it's an important motive force to be able to pull on. Okay. But if that's the only source of motivation, if that's the only power, or if that's the predominant one, you systematically end up with a very confused mind. And you end up with these patterns where it's very difficult to create change in your life or in your psyche or in your emotions or in your relationships that actually mean something, that actually create a shift. It's very hard to do things that, for instance, if you have a recurring argument with a partner, with a spouse or a long-term romantic partner, or even with a friend or a work colleague, if you have a recurring stuck problem with somebody, for instance, you can't get out of it because often the reason that that pattern is there is because it's a necessary consequence of avoiding looking at something. Okay, so that's one type of structure. And then there's this other type of structure that has to do with if you can focus on where you want to go, what you desire, what pulls you. That actually has the potential to create coherence. All the scattered bits can zoom in that direction, and they can start to work together. When you, and again, I realize this is abstract, but I'm going to give a bunch of concrete examples and start to step in the direction of here's what you can do if you want to do this. Okay, I think it's a really good idea, probably for most minds, maybe for all of them eventually, but it's very hard to know. Maybe it's only my weird, quirky mind, and I'm just projecting all over everyone. But I think this makes sense. That if you can notice desire and distinguish desire from, like the desire toward, from the desire away. Like this often gets conflated. If you can actually extract desire toward and then organize most of how you move through your life for motive towards, and then just occasionally spice it with motive away. Because you notice, oh, and this is an error mode and this is an error mode. So let me add a little pepper over here. But this is the organizing principle. I want this life. I want this result. I want it. I desire it. If you can do that, then your whole psyche focuses. Eventually, like it takes a little bit of coordination because you have to do a transition period. Right? So that's sort of the broad stroke of what I want to touch on today. Daniel's asking, what is the mechanism of shattering here? Well, I think I described sort of the overall effect, but let me give you some examples here. Okay, so let me see. trying to like a bunch of examples flash through, and I'm going, some of those might be for things that are a little controversial. So let me see if I can find one that's pretty straightforward. Okay, all right. So let me give an example of some of my own past tendencies towards uh, romance in my own romantic connections, in some of the ways that I contributed to some difficulty in my romantic connections. Um, so if you happen to be familiar with attachment theory, my default tendency has long been anxious preoccupied attachment, which is to say my leaning has strongly been towards being the needy, clingy one. Being very loving, very doting, like constantly thinking, sending little texts going, "Oh, I love you, I'm thinking of you," and then um, uh, then of course, if I'm not, like, I'm consciously thinking this is because I care, it's because I feel so strongly about this person, I'm really excited, I want them to feel this. And then if I'm not getting the right kinds of responses, I start to worry, oh, am I pushing them away? Is this, am I being too clingy? This is a pattern with this structure, is they sort of know that they're clingy and feel bad about it. Like very self-aware in a particular way. So all of this, like, oh, am I being too pushy? Am I driving this person away? Am I maybe I should play it cool? But I'm also supposed to like share my emotions and be open with them, and that seems like it's an important thing to do. And how do I navigate this? I think maybe I'll just kind of, okay, let me give them some space and try that. And then of course this builds up tension, and because they're not responding, and then at some point they sort of walk in and say, hey, and then head over to go on their computer, and then I just simmer for an hour, and then eventually I go, I wanted to make some lunch. Can I make something for you that you would really like? Uh, and like the person just says, look, can you just leave me alone? Like, and then I just explode. So this is a very common type of structure. I'm describing a lot of my own experiences with this. Um, Now, a lot of that, like, there's a way that I can tell the story of how I engage in all of those processes of thinking about my partner in ways that paint me very well. I mean, of course, like saying, "Oh yeah, I'm anxious and I'm trying to sort this out, and I know I pressure them too much. I just love them so much, and I want them to feel the love, but apparently the way that I love them is creating all of this difficulty for them. And how do I navigate that?" But if you sort of could step outside and look at the structure, it's almost purely self-obsessed. I love them. I want them to feel this. Me. I'm feeling tense. Look at how much I am aware of me. Completely invisible. I just couldn't see it at the time at all. Just how utterly self-obsessed I was in all of that. If I was actually attending to my partner, it seems like the predominant concern would have had an emotional tone that goes something more like, oh, she's feeling some kind of pressured. There's something about the way that I'm interacting with her that seems to be creating discomfort for her. Huh. I don't understand that, and I notice I feel a lot of discomfort with that. I wonder how I could come to know how to interact with her so that she would feel more comfortable, more at ease. How could I love her in a language that she would receive well? Now, even though there's a lot of I in there, there's a way where the emotional role of that way of thinking is in an important way, not secondary, but it isn't so ferociously primary. I'm not obsessed with how do I feel good in this situation? How do I make the other person interact with me in a way that makes me feel good? Instead, there's just a question of, there is some self-focus, but it's not as clenchy. It's, oh, I want them to be happy. Maybe that's not an option. Maybe there's nothing I can do. I don't like that. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is highlight an emotional tone underneath. I'm realizing I'm describing the logic in a way that's a little bit scattered. But the emotional tone, I think, is clear. Like, there's this clear distinction between what I need the other person to do versus what I would prefer. So in there, part of what's going on is, or part of what used to go on, like I think I'm past most of this. I'm not. I don't see the parts I'm not past. But I think I see the whole structure pretty clearly now. And looking back, a lot of the issue for me was there was a type of anxiety I would feel in my body. It would be in my stomach, reaching up through the pit of my stomach and a little bit into my chest. There would be this kind of anxiousness, this sort of clenching. And I would have a sense of that feeling is intolerable. I can't stand it. Sometimes I would even say, I can't stand this. But I would be thinking of it and focusing on how much I can't stand. Because the purpose of the thoughts is to distract me from the sensation in my body. Now, there I'm making a bold claim. I'm willing to say this is something I'm happy to stand by. I think this is a pretty general phenomenon. This is the main way that I observe, best as I can tell, minds shatter. Minds create a sort of scattered way of being. There's some sort of agreement that you, whoever you are, kind of wave that around. There's that's its own discussion. What is the self? Who are you? And I think there's an understandable conversation to have there, but this is not that conversation. Whoever you are, you sort of agree with your mind, the thing that thinks, the thing that remembers, the thing that presents ideas and thoughts to you. You agree with your mind's claim that you can't stand this emotion, this feeling, this sensation. And then this summons a whole bunch of, okay, well, how do I distract myself? Okay. So I think that's general. It's definitely true of how I work on the inside when I don't pay attention, when my mind is organized around bullshit. And so these thoughts will present that give me an opportunity to distract myself in much the same kind of way as if you're hammering in a nail and then you miss and you whack your thumb. Like a lot of people have a reaction like, ow, 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 damn. Like the exclamation there and the movement, the reason for that is that movement engages the vestibular sense, your sense of balance, which overrides most of the other neural inputs, such as nociception, right, which is a reasonable way to say pain nerves. Pain is much more complicated than that. But the thing of there's something wrong with my thumb comes primarily through a cluster of nerves that are called nociceptors, which detect potential damage and burning. So that input comes in, and to block the signal, in terms of entering the consciousness, people can swing around and grit their teeth and create a whole bunch of sensation. A lot of times the reason for grabbing the thumb, there's some reason it has to do with protecting from further damage, but another is that this creates a whole bunch of tactile sensation, which is a different nerve pathway and competes with the nociceptors for getting into the brain. So this can create a whole bunch of very immediate neural flashes that can compete with the pain nerves getting their communication to the brain and getting that processed properly. So all of that is distracting versus something like you smash the thumb, there's the initial reaction, and then bringing all of your attention to the experience of the pain. If you were to do that, first off, I think that your experience of the pain would become more intense. But at the same time, you would be able to tolerate it because you're looking. You're not buying into this implicit automatic mechanism that says you can't stand it, here's a distraction. And then going, oh yes, I'm going to go with the distraction. Instead, you're just here. Let me pay attention to this. Okay. So that I think is very close to the basic mechanism our psyches use to shatter, is some kind of, you can't stand this, here's a distraction. For me, in the case of the anxious preoccupied pattern, the clingy pattern, there's a sensation that would show up in my core that I would have this sense of, I can't stand that. How do I deal with it? How do I, like, let me think about, and notice the thinking is not being with the sensation in the body. Let me think about what I could do to win my partner over. Are they thinking of leaving me? That stimulates the sensation even more, which powers my thoughts even more. This mind-body loop is a very basic function that a human system uses. Thoughts that respond in order to distract will sometimes stimulate the same body sensation or related body sensations that you also can't stand. And then that pumps back to more mind babble that can act as distraction. Right? So, for me to get past all of this, I had to acknowledge that what I was trying to do was avoid being with a sensation of discomfort. What if I'm driving her away? Ow. Can I be with the ow? in my body. Maybe she'll leave me. Maybe she's thinking of leaving me. Ow. Let me be with that sensation. Can I just be with the sensations that are present instead of trying to manipulate the world around me, in particular trying to manipulate her, in order to get this sensation in my body to go away? Okay. Now, this I'm going a little bit aside from the motivation thing that I wanted to talk about, but I think this question that Daniel brings up, what is the mechanism of shattering here? This is a foundational thing that is in the back of my mind for tracking how to organize internal motivation in a way that generates systematic coherence versus generating systematic discoherence. The basic rule is if you lean in towards fully experiencing everything, then the threat of experience can't shatter your mind. If you lean into the motives that are based on distracting yourself from experiences that you decide that you don't want, then those experiences will keep showing up as part of the structure of a shattered psyche. That's the basic thing that keeps showing up over and over and over again. If you can get this, not just as a concept, but as a lived experience, which is very hard to get with a shattered psyche, as part of the game. But if you can see this, not just as a concept, but feel it, experience it, watch it in real time, then you can see exactly where to place your attention and how to shape your thoughts so that you can process the things that have been shaping you semi to subconsciously to make you recreate the same pains and difficulties and struggles in your life, to have the same issues showing up over and over again, and instead direct your life towards, let me bring this into my life. Okay. So, it's a shattering mechanism. One example of it. Now, I want to highlight a couple of things having to do with what does it mean to zoom in on actual desire, because there's an illusion that appears because of the ow, 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 this hurts so much, ah, how stupid of me. Like that, the purpose of those thoughts is to keep you distracted. So if you look too clearly at the fact that this is what's going on, those thoughts will pump up because you're looking too closely at the thing your thoughts are there to distract you from. So making a clear distinction between the desire for something and the desire to get away from something. This is tricky at first, but I think is an experiential obvious thing. So I want to point this out as an immediate lived experience so that there's some clarity about what I am talking about. Let me see, Ronnie posted something. Why does it keep coming back if I lean into distracting myself from it when it shows up? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is reality is there whether you ignore it or not. Like after you have smashed your thumb and then you go, ah, while you're screaming, your thumb is still smashed and it's still attached to you and the nociceptors are still pumping their information into your body. It's still there. Okay. Likewise, in the situation where I would be caught up in this anxious, preoccupied, needy, graspy pattern with connection to my partner, with relationship to my partner, or rather with relationship to my mental projections on this human being who gets to play the role of my partner. The obsession with, oh God, is she going to leave me? Am I driving her away? Am I being too clingy? Maybe I need to be more independent. Let me focus on being independent. In fact, I'm going to focus on that because I have strength. And I'm going to, like all those thoughts, all that babble doesn't change the physical world. It doesn't change what originally stimulated the feeling. The feeling is still there. The causes of the feeling, see, that's more the important part. The causes, the original triggers that stimulate the feeling are still there. Even if I'm babbling in my head, I haven't addressed the fact that there is an interaction pattern between me and my partner that would trigger the way in which I feel anxious about whether or not our relationship is stable. So I'm not addressing reality. That's the basic thing that keeps coming up over and over and over again with these structures. They disconnect from reality. They're secretly bullshit structures. Now, occasionally, you can ignore things into oblivion. Like sometimes, like there are some reactive patterns that go something like my mind is flashing through noticing they're thinking of Enneagram personality types, thinking of type 9. You don't need to know the Enneagram, but that's what's going through my mind. I'm trying to zoom in on a clear example of this. Like there's like I know some I have a friend who will often address basically any kind of conflict between friends as, hey, like, we don't need to fight, we can just get along. Okay? And like there's something true about that. Like, yeah, why are we fighting? Why don't we just drop it? Like if we stopped fighting, there wouldn't be a problem. We could just drop it. The problem is that sometimes conflicts are have substance, and just ignoring the conflict doesn't deal with the substance. But sometimes it does. Sometimes the conflict is both people are hungry, and if they stop fighting and they go eat, then the problem is solved. And so you've successfully sort of ignored the problem into oblivion because the problem was you were focusing on the argument, and if you actually just let go, things are okay. But those are, most of the time, I'm under the impression that we're reasonably okay at dealing with problems that can be ignored into oblivion, sort of illusory problems in some sense. The ones that are sticky, that keep coming back, they keep coming back because there is some sort of structure that keeps bringing them back. And if your whole strategy, if your whole internal organizational strategy is to try to ignore them into oblivion, that actually feeds the pattern. We loop back to the question of like the framing of memes or demons. The act of ignoring is part of the demon. It is part of the structure that keeps itself alive. One of the reasons I think it's a useful frame is because you can actually view this as having a kind of intelligence, in part because it's using your intelligence in order to reenact the pattern. This is one of the reasons why you'll see people dating the same problem over and over again. There's something about not just like having anxiety about whether the partner is leaving, but also familiarity with being in that kind of anxious loop. So there's a whole arc to go into that in terms of people actively seeking out the things that they are trying to ignore. But this is a pretty well-known kind of phenomenon. Like this is related to the thing where adult children of alcoholics often dating people who encourage the same kind of life situation, and sometimes even dating alcoholics. Because the usual story is something like that's how the pattern for love has been imprinted in the person. I think there's a way to understand it mechanically, a lot more mechanically, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Okay, so I want to talk about this distinction of desire types. If you there's a set of kinds of exercises I guess it would be possible to do, but I'm aware that I don't want to have this go on too long, and I can't see what people are doing. And it's hard to have a conversation when the only interaction is by text. But there's, if you imagine, we're going to go through a process of, all right, so write down, what is it that you most want in your life? What do you really want? Okay. A lot of the common things that people will put down we'll look at things like, well, I want a healthy body. I would like to have a lot more money, like ease in financial situation or to get rid of my debt. I want a good relationship, or I want my relationship to do really well. There's something really important to track about a lot of desires like this, that not always, but a lot of the time, they're secretly ways of relieving pain or avoiding sensations. Okay? Not always, but it's common enough that it's worth tracking. Like if you look at something like money, it's like, you take money, because it's a simple topic. A lot of the reason people would like to have a lot of money. Not everybody does. A lot of people have a lot of issues with having a lot of money. I don't mean to dismiss that. But for people who claim, yeah, I want to make a lot of money, like, well, that's part of the drive that I have here. Okay, why? What is it that you want the money for? A lot of times, what they're actually tracking is how there's a sense of scarcity or a kind of oppression that comes from, well, I need to pay the rent and I keep having to work to pay the rent, and it would be nice to not have to work doing, like, I don't want to have to work doing things I don't want to do in order to earn money to pay the rent and get groceries. And there's anxiety around, in the United States, if you get hit by a car, not only does your body get destroyed, but if you don't have exactly the right configuration of insurance, you might have your financial life destroyed too. It would be great to not have to worry about that. So there's, this is not the only motive. Like, for me, one of the reasons I would love to have, like, no more financial restrictions to live my life the way I want to is because I really love travel. I enjoy travel, not just for the sake of like commuting across the world, but like I like to visit other cultures and get a chance to really immerse myself in them and experience them. I have a lot of friends across the world, and it would be nice to visit them. That seems like really pleasurable. There's a draw there. I enjoy that. That's not primarily about avoiding a sensation. That's about creating something that I would love to experience. But here's an important distinction there. Like, getting rid of a negative versus seeking a positive. And the key aspect is not that one is better than the other. Some groups will talk about this as the difference between a toward goal and an away goal. Or I have one friend that distinguishes between push drivers and pull drivers, because one is pushing you away and the other is pulling you toward it. I think that it's really valuable and important to track that we often don't make this distinction in practice when we're identifying what we want, and that this creates a kind of inner confusion that serves psychic shattering. But so this is, I'm noticing that now that I'm saying this, I'm realizing there's actually two phenomenological distinctions that I think are related that I had planned on making, and I made the second one first, which I think is okay. But I do think that part's important. It's valuable, being able to track these two different kinds of desires, in part because if you, like, this is one of the big challenges that I think a lot of people get into when they're trying to write down or plan out, these are the goals that I have for my life. Okay? A lot of these goals are secretly away goals. I want to get rid of this problem. I want to get rid of this problem. I want to get rid of this problem. But there's no vision in that saying, this is how I'm going to do it, and I want this. I really want this. Instead, it's constantly thinking about all these things that you want to make go away, which boots up all of the stuff that is trying to distract you from the sensations that make you want these things to go away in the first place. So, unsurprisingly, it becomes very hard not only to come up with a coherent plan, but even if you do, it becomes very hard to stick to it, because sticking to the plan requires returning your mind over and over again to the sensations that you haven't decided to be with. There's no coherence. There's no way to create a coherent will. Instead, it's just a whole bunch of reactive engines in your own mind reacting to each other. So I want to go one layer deeper and talk about one of the most basic phenomenological, one of the most basic experiential components that I don't know if this is universal, but I think it might be close to universal. One of the most universal experiences that seems to be a basic structuring pattern for how people drive themselves. There's a our cat sometimes gets lost in the house, going, "Where are you guys?" So I'm hearing him in the distance. You might hear him too. Okay, so there's a tone, a basic tone about our sense of ourselves, about who we are, about how we feel about who we are, that can go, what is wrong with me? I don't deserve to exist. Or my existence, I need to earn my existence. I'm in sort of existential debt. Like there's a negativity about my being. I'm flawed. There's something I have to fix. It's necessary for me to grow. It's necessary for me to improve because how I am isn't enough. Okay? Now, I want to get really precise about this experience. I don't know how it feels in the body for everybody. I'll describe some of the sensation, but I want to triangulate this with a bit of cognition to try to light this up really clearly. There's a song in Moana that is her like near the very beginning where she's singing about how no matter what she does, she wants to go off for adventure, and she should be happy with the life that she has, with being the chieftain's daughter and inheriting all of these roles and responsibilities and following the procedures of just being part of the island culture. But no matter what she does, like every step I take, like everywhere that she looks, she keeps finding herself sort of at the water's edge, longing to go out to the far sea. And in the middle of that song, she ends up exclaiming, "What is wrong with me?" So like that's one tone. This "what is wrong with me?" Ah. So like that's one snapshot, one component to take. There's another snapshot. I'm not sure how commonly known this is in the culture anymore, but I'm going to go ahead and run with it. From Star Trek: The Next Generation, there's a Commander Data who is an android. And he has no emotions. This is one of the big things that he's operating under of, oh, well, I just do what is logical because that is what my programming allows. If you imagine this character going around looking and saying, oh, I keep making systematic errors, and I do not seem to be able to identify what their nature is. I wonder what is wrong with me. Okay. So there's a way where that has sort of a, oh, well, let me look at this. There seems to be something going off. Let me examine this. What's going on here? It seems almost like it has the same content in some sense, but there's obviously something missing versus the, what is wrong with me? Okay. So the difference between these two is not, are you looking at what is wrong with you? Are you paying attention? Are you trying to improve yourself? That's not the issue. There's some sort of core pain that is involved in the, what is wrong with me? That feels like something. And that has a very specific type of sensation. For me, when it wells up, it's almost like this dark pit in the center of my chest that sort of wells up and almost like wants to grip and sicken my throat. It creates a kind of nausea in my belly. There's no matter what I do, like I went through a bunch of this through a lot of 2019, noticing, like I went through my entire life, but being conscious of it, focusing on it, trying to attend to it, noticing, okay, I've tried a lot of different projects to try to do something good for the world, and they keep failing. I can keep pointing at the world and saying it's because of these issues, but one of the common elements between all of these things is me. So is there something wrong with me? What's wrong with me? So having this kind of, like in some sense, trying to do introspection to help things, and like Commander Data, how do I examine this? But there's a pain. Because there might be some flaw with how I'm engaging with things, that means something bad and awful about me. I can feel it. I am bad. There's something wrong. Okay. Now, I'm wanting to check. I see that there's no pings or questions or comments for the last 16 minutes. I'd be curious to know for those who are listening here, if this is resonating, if this makes sense, if this is clicking with something, or if it's not. Like I'm not trying to force an experience on you. I'm trying to, my hope is, to the extent that this is a common thing, that we can zoom in on it, to hone in on it and observe it. Because once we can observe very clearly the sensation of there's something wrong with me, what I've noticed is for each person I've been able to interact with and highlight this phenomenology, to highlight this sensation, if we can distinguish between this sensation and the one that is a bright hope. I'll get into bright hope in a moment, but it's important to have this phenomenology clear, and then also so that there's something to contrast it with. Okay, I think it is for me. Yes, very much. Yes, it is. Missed a few minutes, but came back, and yes, it is. Okay, cool. That's good to know. I'm still very open to more answers about this and more detail. I also don't want to spend minutes here on the video just staring at the chat in case someone replies. So I'm going to carry on, but I'm happy to shift back and answer. So please do continue to respond if you have more things to say. Okay. So, okay. So this, what is wrong with me? I claim that this ache is at the center of the push driver, the center of this mechanism of getting away from. Now again, I put these claims forward over and over again. My intention when I'm putting forward these claims is to point at your own experience so that you can see for yourself what's there. Excuse me. Okay. I'm not trying to force a model on you. I'm trying to invite you to see something. Okay. This is, in a deep sense, meant to start a type of conversation. I have a tool in mind. I have a frame in mind. So, but the goal is not to make you agree with me. The goal is to invite you to see. So I'm going to make a claim, and you're very welcome to disagree with me. But I'm inviting you to look. I think you'll find this pain that is in the what's wrong with me is at the core of basically every I can't stand that sensation. Okay. There's some sort of like, I can't, like, how do I am awful. How do I deal with it? I don't think it's the core seed, but it might as well be. That sensation at the essence keeps showing up. It keeps being present. It's like the primary energy source for making it so that having this negative sensation drives. So back in the case of my anxious preoccupied patterns, the clingy romantic patterns, like what's so awful about feeling the sensations that I associate with fear of pushing my partner away? Like there's a thought, oh, I might be pushing my partner away. I wonder how I could account for that. Like there could be a cleanliness about it. Oh, I might be pushing my partner away, and that hurts. It probably hurts her too. That's probably why I would be pushing her away. I wonder how I can find out what's real and how I can encourage a nurturing, flourishing relationship in the way that both of us would love. It's like an emotionally engaged version of the commander data thing, right? But there's something awful about it. There's something terrible. And I claim that the terribleness is in part coming from the sense that the fact that I might be pushing her away means there's something wrong with me. That's why there's self-obsession. It loops back to me, because I'm trying to solve the problem of why I'm bad. But I'm not really trying to. This is one of the most universal mimetic structures in modern culture, as far as I can tell. And I use meme and demon basically interchangeably. Like it is one of the most common of these structures. How the sense of a self that can be judged. And so using that feeling is part of where the drive of, oh, I can't stand me being awful. So to make up for my awfulness, or to avoid becoming awful or proving it, or to earn my existence, to improve my moral worth, I need to fix this thing about me. How do I do the things that make it so that I am not doing this awful, terrible thing of pushing my partner away, thereby, which would invalidate me? Like that's a lot of the structure that I keep finding over and over and over again at the core of this pain. How do I make up for the fact that I exist? Okay. So I have a second side to this, which has to do with what's that in contrast to? What is a bright desire? But I see that there's some responses here, so let me dig into this. All right, so John says, whoops, it's covered. There we go. For me, it's more that I feel like there's something standing in the way of what I want, and it's the self-doubt about whether I'll be able to overcome it that hurts and feels like not enough or wrong with me. What if I fail? Yeah, that's absolutely a manifestation of this kind of thing. I'm wanting to honor that you're trying to say, but there's a difference I experience from what you're saying. I totally want to honor that. I may not be capturing the entire dimension of ways that this manifests because I'm trying to simplify it a bit in order to capture the common threads. But the common thread of am I going to be able to overcome this? If I can't, what is wrong with me? Right? That to me, that is an example of the type of thing that if this were articulated ideally, this would feel like it really captures. So absolutely, I think what you're highlighting is a great manifestation of the type of thing that I'm trying to talk about. I appreciate you bringing that up. Rupert says, or if another says something which implies that we are not committed enough, we don't really want to do our best, that that too can bring forth the feeling, even if they maybe did not mean it to produce that feeling. Yeah. With an additional caveat, which is them saying that can be them trying to manipulate us because they're trying to get away from a feeling. And if we need them to feel okay, for us to feel okay, for us to be okay, that's where the hook happens. That's where the codependent bullshit happens in a relationship, where we're co-manipulating each other's emotions and calling that love. Because there's totally a way where, like, if my partner came to me and said, let me grab said something like, said, hey, you're not really doing your best in this relationship. For me, there would be a shock of pain and sort of disorientation, because like the nature of our relationship would mean, what the hell just happened in our connection such as she's saying that? Huh. But then what would go through my mind and being is, okay, I'm feeling this pain. That's uncomfortable. I observe the fact that she's in pain. Something's making her say this. Okay. I notice what I would want. I would love us to sort this out. And there's a curiosity, well, maybe she's right. Maybe there's a way that I'm not really giving it my all. Now this comes from having worked with this model for a while and focusing more and more of my psyche around bright desire. And that seems to have basically cured my anxious preoccupied pattern. There'd be a lot of pain in that experience, but I don't mind the pain. I just disprefer it. I would like to address it. The pain feels like a communication signal to myself about, oh, I need to sort something out here. So, yeah, so absolutely. I think that you're highlighting a great thing, but the thing the key thing is that the partner saying something that triggers something in you that is related to this, what is wrong with me? Okay? That is still about you. Like the trigger is about you. It's still happening internally. The fact that the trigger appeared externally doesn't mean anything about what you need to do to change the external world. The core issue is, oh, this is triggering the what is wrong with me feeling. Can I be with the what is wrong with me feeling? And if you can not try to avoid that, not try to make it go away, but actually just be with it, suddenly it can't control you. Now it's hard to do that without having what I keep calling bright desire as a contrast point. We'll get to that. Okay, so let's see. Marcello says, is it always an I am awful? I imagine in more narcissistic modes, it looks more like everything except me is awful. Okay, so narcissism is an interesting case. Most of the time when people are talking about narcissism, I claim they are still talking about this, but they are talking about a manifestation of a very sticky strategy to getting away from the what is wrong with me, or I don't deserve to exist, or I have to earn my existence, or I am beholden to something because my value is in question. The narcissistic answer is, let me obsess over the ways in which I'm great. Let me focus on myself and let me get validation from everything around me about how great I am as the distraction. It sort of looks like, well, let me disprove this, but the goal is not to dialogue with it. The goal is to just yell at it until you can't experience it anymore. Now, secretly, basically all egos are narcissistic. Like this is a basic, the dark triad of psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. These are actually universal traits of how egos work. It's mostly a matter of degree. Okay, now at some point I want to talk about the dark triad because I think it's a very powerful topic that we need to discuss as a culture. We need to take a lot more seriously, I think, in order for us to move to a good world. It's like a necessary step for us to really take seriously. But like this is one manifestation of narcissism. And it's, I think, by far the most common one, where the narcissistic drive is actually coming from a lot of pain, which is part of why narcissists, like people that we call narcissists, can flip out if you outshine them, and can flip out if you criticize them, because you're confronting them with this pain. And their entire cognitive psychic strategy is wrapped around how to never experience that discomfort again. Even though it's constantly ongoing, even though it is what is driving them to do all this behavior. So it's actually constantly present, and they're constantly trying to ignore it. It's a shattered psyche. Okay. Now, there is a different kind of orientation that I'm not quite sure. I can imagine this in theory space, and I notice that in practice there seems to be a difference between people who are so traumatized that they act narcissistically versus people who have a really deep instance of true clinical narcissistic personality disorder. Okay. I don't know if this distinction is just a matter of scale or if there's actually a genetic difference. I think there's a huge case to be made that psychopathy has a manifestation as a genetic disorder that probably can be triggered by certain circumstances, but antisocial personality disorder seems to be a thing that can emerge that you can see in incredibly young children. Like, that's fascinating. And I don't know to what degree that's also true of clinical narcissism, but I could imagine there being a type of clinical narcissist where the issue is they are basically born without a capacity for empathy, and what draws them is admiration. So their entire psychic structure is organized around this sense of, I'm obviously the greatest. All of these inferior beings are just, they're dirt and schmuck. I am God here. I am the God. I am the best. They should acknowledge it. How dare this thing try to challenge me? Like there's a coherence there that is wrapped around not pain, but rather an incapacity for empathy. Like something being wrong with mirror neurons or something. Okay. That seems like a possible thing, and I don't think that's quite the same mechanism. But also I don't know how common that is. Right? And part of the issue is that it's very hard to examine narcissists, because narcissists of any breed, but certainly the farther you go towards the extreme narcissistic personality disorder side, the harder it is to, like, they don't think there's anything wrong with them. So how do you study them? You say, well, we would like to understand your godhood better if you would please allow us your divinity. Like it's so it's very difficult to do good studies on narcissists. So there's an ignorance there. Okay, let's see. So is it always I'm awful? Let's see. So John says, maybe not essentially different, just a different way to think about it. Yeah, I think that was in response to me mentioning to you. Cool. Awesome. Rupert, let's see. I have to click see more. All right. Quote, I don't really feel like bothering to get useful work done today, but if Marie asks me at the end of the day, what have you done today? And I haven't done enough, even if maybe she won't mind, then I won't be good enough. That will be terrible. So I'll try to force myself to get stuff done. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely a thing. Yeah. Relatedly, when I start bringing this stuff up, a lot of people have an experience of, well, if I were to stop being motivated by this sense of shame, this sense of badness, this sense of there's something wrong with me, then maybe I won't work as hard. Maybe I won't try so hard to make myself better. Maybe I'll act unvirtuously. Maybe I won't care for people quite as well as I do because because part of the reason I act nice, for instance, part of the reason I'm nice and considerate towards people is out of this sense of, well, if I don't, that means there's something wrong with me. So if I really become free of this, I might become a worse human being. That seems awful. Do I even want to do that? Is this like something I actually want to deal with? Okay. No, I mentioned this. There was actually I gave a text reply to what I considered to be a manifestation of this concern in one of my posts over the last couple of days. And there's something called a Broccoli error. It's like the rationality community down in Berkeley has some very colorful ways of naming things. Broccoli error is a reference to somebody saying, no, I really hate broccoli, and I wouldn't want to change that about myself. I wouldn't want to push a button or take a pill or something like that that would change whether I like broccoli, because if I made it so that I like broccoli, I would eat more broccoli, and I don't like broccoli. It's like not accounting for what the change would mean in the process. Now, if the reason for not liking broccoli is tracking something real, that's a different issue. But if the reason for avoiding broccoli is because you don't like it, then what's the problem? Right? So there's a logic gap that the human mind has a really hard time navigating because it's shattered. Because it has a lot of difficulty. We by default, our default setting in this culture, in almost any culture in the world, any culture that is plugged into the global civilizational machine, is going to have a really hard time not being shattered. And any shattered psyche is going to have a really hard time tracking the details of what the reasoning actually means on the inside. Because if you were to track the details, it would actually fix the shatter. So, to an extent, like you have to do some emotional work. It's not just purely cognitive. So there's something very important. Well, I don't want to take too much time. I'm wanting to account for the fact that we're 57 minutes in, and in my desperate attempt to do these at 20 minutes, I'm going, okay, great, I'll just aim for an hour now. Oh, okay. Apparently an hour is short for me too, because I babble. This is part of my babble phase, like I said at the very beginning. Like I said a week ago on my first video for this month, that I'm trying to articulate this stuff. It's going to be babbly, it's going to be long, and it will compress over time, because that's how evolutionary processes of thought work. So there's something very important about tracking what this means about morality and what this means about becoming a more moral person. I actually think that that's very valuable and it's very important. And it's very connected to the argument of sort of the Christian concern about atheism, about, well, atheists have no reason to be moral. They have no God overlooking them. So this seems like it's moral permission to do anything you want, and that seems horrendous. And there's kind of a natural atheist response, which is, if the only reason you aren't doing horrible things is because God will punish you if you don't, then that doesn't make you a very moral person. Okay. Now, that whole conversation is trying to yank on this "what is wrong with me" thing. But I think that there's something true at the core, which is something more like, if actually the only reason you are nice to people is because of a loop that has to do with trying to get away from this terrible sensation of feeling like a bad person, and you're trying to prove it to yourself, and if you were to get rid of that and then suddenly you're cruel to everybody, then that means that your actual desire has nothing to do with being nice to people. And the only reason you care about being nice to people is because you're confused about who you are. But in practice, to the extent that it actually matters to you, and I think this is true for just about everybody, except for the antisocial personality disorder people and related clusters, the actual genetic dark triad. But even then, I think this holds for in an important way. We'll get to that in a future discussion. But for the vast majority of people, the reason it bothers you is because there's a thing that you care about. There's a bright desire that is violated by being cruel. if you can get in touch with that, instead of trying to make yourself do things based on pain, then you can be more coherent about what kind of good you're creating in the world. You can't do as much good if the reason you are doing good is to get away from a sense that you are evil. But if you can see what good means, then you can actually organize your way of operating in a way that creates a better world by your standards. Okay. Okay, but anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, and that's a little bit different than what I actually want to focus on in this discussion. Okay, so let's see. John says, or at least neurological without necessarily a genetic cause. Yeah, talking about to the extent that there's some sort of biological core going on with dark triad. Like maybe it's just a neurological different mode. It's a fascinating like journalist pop book, The Wisdom of Psychopaths, that talks about there being sort of a way to shift a brain using a magnetic resonance to deactivate a particular part of the brain, I forget exactly which part, that can actually cause an experience that is very compatible with just becoming psychopathic. Very fascinating. And all of our information right now is complete crud, so don't believe anything. But it's an interesting option, or an interesting possibility. Rupert says, would you take the bisexuality pill? Broccoli error. Yeah. 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 All right, John says, would you accept death? Then you wouldn't be afraid of it. No, because I'm afraid of it. Yeah, yeah. So in these cases, there's an additional element, which is also something like in the case of something like fear of death, there's thought about, well, isn't the fear of death making you more vigilant of things that might kill you, thereby keeping you from dying? Well, I think that might be partially true. I think there's an important element to it. But also, if that's the only reason you're taking actions to deal with death, then you are shattering your psyche in a way that makes you not very effective at dealing with death. So, is there a way that you can both tap into the vigilance of fear of death while also organizing your primary focus around what I've been hinting at as bright desire, which I realize I still haven't gotten to. I want to get to soon here. Trista says, plays into the current discussion about disbanding police. Yes, yes. To risk invoking a demon that will want to punch me in the face for daring to speak heresy. Yeah. There's an error type that goes something like, this thing is awful, therefore let's destroy it. Sounds very sensible. But the problem is that it's not accounting for the question of why the awfulness appears to be there in the first place. And it's important to track appears to. One of the reasons something might appear to be awful is because it's awful. Another reason it might appear to be awful is because you're projecting onto it and you don't see things clearly. Another reason it might appear to be awful is because you're being manipulated. And maybe all of those are true, and maybe something else is true. Right? And for the most part, the effort to deal with bad things in the world by destroying them tends to systematically create scars in the collective psyche. There's a deep discussion to have there closely related to the question of the dark triad. It turns out that it is enormously advantageous to psychopaths to be psychopathic, which is one of the reasons why psychopathy exists. So how do you deal with real psychopathy? How do you actually deal with it as a culture? You can't ban it, you can't just attack it, but if you leave it alone to do its default, it corrupts culture. It's like a cultural cancer. So what do you do? I think there is a potential answer type. I don't know the answer, but I think it's really important to ask the question rather than just freaking out about how awful psychopaths are and trying to destroy them. Because freaking out about how awful psychopaths are and trying to destroy them incentivizes them to hide their nature and be cancerous, and it makes it an advantage for them to be psychopathic because then they can't be hunted down nearly as effectively if they don't have empathy. They have more power to manipulate if they don't mind what happens to the people they're manipulating. So there's like a loopy thing that happens every time we try to deal with our collective shadow by destroying it, using Carl Jung's sense of shadow. Hey, Kaya. Well, you'll be able to see the replay later. Let's see, Marcello says, and if you're being nice to people who run away from the darkness, that means you're doing good-hearted niceness, because running away from the darkness happens even if you only do a thing that looks nice. Yeah. For those who don't know, when Marcello says good-hearted, I'm pretty sure he's referring to something called Goodhart's Law, which says whenever you have a measure for something you care about, and then you try to do well according to the measurement ceases to be a good way of tracking what you care about. An example of this is when a teacher starts teaching to the test in order to improve test scores. Okay, so over an hour in, let me go to the other one, the one that isn't what is wrong with me as the driving core, what I've been calling bright desire. So at this point, I'm going to want to give you a few moments. I'm going to go ahead and pause babbling after I give a prompt, because I think that it's important to tap into the feeling of this. If you just plan on doing this later, you might find yourself suspiciously distracted. And I want to give you a piece of this experience, because having this experience is really key. So here's the prompt. If you were fine, if your basic needs were met, if the people around you were okay, they were happy, they were doing all right, if the world were fine, if there were no problems in the world, what would you still love to do? Try to come up with at least one answer. What is something you would still love to do if everything were fine? You can respond in text if you want to. Sometimes it can help others to think about it if there are examples. And I can give you a few of mine. Travel, I gave an instance of that, like getting to meet other cultures and learn about them and get exposed to them. To me, that's a bright thing for me. I'd love to do that even if everything were fine. If the world were saved, I would still love that. I would love to feel my body exerting itself. I love doing athletic things. I'm not claiming everybody does. I'm not claiming everybody wants any of these things. It's a question of what do you want. I just enjoy exerting my body, feeling my body's strength and its exuberance, and getting myself a little winded. I love the sensations that come with that and the feelings I get from my body becoming stronger over time from that. I love a particular kind of learning. I love learning systems. I find it beautiful. I find it fascinating. Right? This includes things like personality typing systems. I love physics and diving into understanding how that system works. Over the last couple of months, I started diving into the Kabbalah, which is a form of Jewish mysticism that is actually an important part of the core of a lot of Western culture. But a lot of the reason I love these things is because I get insight, and I love the sensation of insight. Same reason I went into, one of the reasons I went into mathematics. It's just something beautiful to me of exploring math and seeing truth in these ways. It's just some examples. Intellectual pursuits, proving theorems, caring for Marie, yeah. Sitting outside, yeah, I love getting a chance to walk through nature and really feel the impact on my heart. Creating art, dance, sex, feel words in my mouth. Oh yeah, yeah. Yes, yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's bright desire. That sensation, the sensation that you get when you focus on if everything were fine, what would I still love to do? Not what would I do anyway? If everything were okay, then what? Well, maybe we could avoid these future problems by doing that. Like, that's important to track, but also that's not what life is for. What's the stuff that if this were heaven would be heavenly? What makes your soul sing? Metaphorically speaking, what makes your being filled with joy? What is the bright desire? That's the feeling. You can feel, if you go back to what's wrong with me, right? There's a sickness to that, in contrast to the bright desire. really tracking that distinction, getting really familiar. Can you get this feeling of, oh yes, sunlight, seeing the sun rise and set, seeing a beautiful landscape of trees, listening to music, the way that that makes my heart sing. Oh, that is exquisite. Being with my family. I love my family. And that's about me. That's what's true of me. And the way that I sing, the way my being radiates when I am in tune with what I love, naturally, from what I can tell, tends to encourage other beings around me to sort of remember, oh, right, life can be good. What's like that for me? It doesn't always reach consciousness, but this is what I think a lot of people are talking about when they're referring to high vibration. Like there's a joyousness that can organize your psyche, organize your being, plug your heart into your conscious thoughts, or your conscious thoughts into your heart, rather. More goes the other way, right? It organizes everything around, oh, right, that's what a good life is. A life filled with joy. That's what joy feels like. It's not about doing my job, making sure that I'm doing these little bits of duties and pieces, and that I'm adulting correctly. Or right? So what? So you've adulted correctly. Now you have correctly apologized for your existence. Now what? That's not it. There's this fantastic, joyous coherence that as you cultivate this, as you become more aware of this, and as you ask, what do I want to do now? Ideas will come to mind, and you can ask yourself, like the thought comes to mind, what do I want to do now? Oh, I have some emails to reply to. When you think that thought, what does it feel like? Does it feel like, oh man, I get to reply to some emails. I love having these conversations with these people. I love the chance of getting to create something beautiful. This is wonderful. I would do this for free. Right? Is that the experience? Or is the experience more like, yeah, I've got these emails and I haven't replied to them, and I really wonder about what's going on with, like, are they thinking bad things about me, and does that secretly mean there's something bad about me? Like, a lot of these thoughts, I'm bubbling up from the subconscious. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily what's consciously going on. What I'm trying to do is verbally capture the feeling. Does it feel bright? Does it make your eyes light up? Does it make you lean forward and go, oh, I can do this. I get to do this. Or does it feel like, or like, what does your body do when you think the thought about what you want to do next? I'm not saying you should focus on the bright desire. That would be there's something wrong with you if you don't. Well, let me solve this. This is like, it just creates chaos that will keep systematically shattering your psyche. I'm not claiming anything about what you should do. I'm claiming something that you can come to observe for yourself about a fact about the organizational principle of a psyche. You can choose to lean in the direction of trying to solve the problem of there being something wrong with you, try to avoid the feeling, or you can take a breath, notice that sensation, welcome it. Like, don't try to get away from the sense of what's wrong with me. That's present. It's part of the present moment. Okay, breathe into that and ask, cool, I acknowledge that, I honor it, and if I were fine, not claiming I am, but if I were fine, if everyone around me were fine, if the world were fine, if the future were safe, if everything and everyone were okay, what would I love to do right now? That doesn't necessarily say what you should do. Should is almost always a sign that you're coming from the shatter. Should is almost always a sign that, not from the shatter, from the pain. It's almost always a sign that you're coming from the pain. Should doesn't make sense. That's hard to see from inside a shattered psyche, but should actually doesn't mean anything. It is, should is a mental structure that is meant to stimulate pain to create action. It is a tool for creating motivation. It doesn't mean anything at all. I'll stand by that. Maybe as I stand by it, people will argue with me and I'll realize I was wrong in some way, but I'm pretty confident of this. It should seems to be an organizational strategy. It doesn't mean anything. So when, in this sense of should, if I say something like, "Oh, well, if I drop this cup, it should fall," that's a prediction. That's a different sense of should. But I shouldn't drop the cup. Almost always when we use the word should in that sense, we're talking from pain. So I'm not saying anything about you should or shouldn't do. I am pointing out an invitation that as you become familiar with these energies and as you pay attention in each moment, when you feel motivated to do something, are you feeling motivated because there's something you got to solve? Are you feeling motivated because this, we just got to do, it makes sense. Like you have to fight for this cause. You have to do this good thing because we could create a beautiful world. Like a lot of these thoughts about how do we create a beautiful world are built out of lies that are trying to avoid pain. Not outward lies necessarily, but inward lies, inner distraction, inner bullshit. Can you notice that? Notice the fact that it has this sense to it, and invite, oh, what would be bright? Okay, so let me see. Got some, yeah, so poignant. Thanks. Kai saying, I'm noticing that there are a bunch of things I would probably have given as answers to this prompt earlier in life, but now there's something around them that makes them feel barren and drained of energy. Blah. Oh, that is interesting. I don't know how to interpret that. I mean, to me, when I read that, Kai, what I experience is some sense of, oh, that feels bad. So what would feel good? What would feel joyous? Like, I invented those prompts not because these prompts are magical things, but because that was something that I noticed in the course of interacting with myself and interacting with others, seemed to encourage attention to go towards the phenomenology, the inner experience of bright desire. To me, the bright desire is the point. It actually feels almost like I have a sun in my heart, and the sun glows, and if I breathe into it, I sort of fill it with air and attention. Light can come from my eyes, it can radiate from my being, and I can live. I can organize more and more of my life around this principle. There's actually a tool that, a 2x2 grid that I debated offering here, but I realized I probably wasn't going to have time to do. I might offer later in this month, but there's a way of sorting out all of the activities that we do into 4 simple categories that help us to track, oh, there's a way to account for, or to track what kind of effect our choices are having in our lives and how much it's leaning in the direction of making our lives filled by a motive of bright desire versus filled by motives that primarily shatter the psyche. That's actually, to me, the interesting thing. It's not about the prompt, it's about paying attention. What sensation is the driving force behind the thing I'm choosing to do? Why do I want to? What is the feeling of want to do this? Is it more like, or is it more like, let's see, psilocybin trips. Yeah. There's a fascinating thing about, I don't know if this is true, but a thing that I've heard said many times. One of the effects that many psychedelics have, and this matches my own experience having worked with them, with psilocybin and ayahuasca and huachuma, which is a form of San Pedro in Peru, and a couple of others. There's an experience of more of the mind becomes interconnected, and so the shattered nature of the psyche can't work as well to keep you from noticing things. And also at the same time, sometimes it can help, depending on which psychedelic you're using, excuse me, it can make it so that the sensations that you encounter are more bearable, or that you, or maybe it's more accurate to say that you forget that you can't stand, or sorry, you forget the illusion that you can't stand it. You remember the fact that you can actually stand every experience. It's not a conscious thought, but it's something that you actually just encounter. So often, I don't know how frequently, but often, psilocybin trips and other forms of psychedelics can encourage, depending on set and setting, can encourage an integration of the psyche. To me, I'm guessing that's where most of the benefits of psychedelics come from. If this is correct, who knows? All of our information infrastructure as a culture is completely screwed right now, so who knows what's true? But to the extent that that's true, I would, and my personal sense of it, my current model is, I suspect that that's a lot of where the benefit is coming from. Okay, Trista says, in the midst of panic attacks, I could tell myself, there is no bear. Or you say would. I would tell myself, there is no bear, meaning there is no immediate danger, to begin to shift out of the heightened reaction to purely mental situations. Yeah. And some of these really basic physiological things, like panic attacks, yeah, they definitely come from some kind of super fast loop going between the mind and the body. But sometimes one of the problems with things like panic attacks is that often that loop no longer goes through the conscious mind. So it can be really challenging to choose where to place your focus in a way that affects that stuff. I am blessed to not have those kinds of challenges, and I am sorry for people like yourself, apparently, who go through that. Also, kudos to you. That's like being able to navigate that, cultivating the strength needed to really show up in life with those kinds of challenges. That's a power. A lot of this business of shifting the attention, like being able to bring the focus to, okay, not only, yeah, there is no danger, I am okay. This is an alternative sensation. Yeah, being able to push that in until the fast mind-body loop has sort of an alternative and that it can be challenged. Yeah, I'm not too surprised that that works. That makes sense, and I'm glad that you have the tool there. Okay. See, Marcello says, exactly, I'm not quite sure in response to what, but cool. It was 4 minutes ago. As I see it, the original meaning of we're talking about should, yes, exactly. If I see it, the original meaning of should, we learn, is when an authority figure wants you to do something and might punish you if you don't. You can't use it internally without being a master and servant at the same time, which is dissociated. Yeah. If you are upset with yourself, that means you have to have at least two perspectives in your own psyche. I don't know how to be a whole lot clearer about an example of what it means to have a shattered psyche than that. How can you be in two positions at once such that you can be upset with yourself? Who is upset with whom? Why are there two of you? I thought there was one. How many are there? Oh, well, one part is upset with another. Great. So that's a fact about your own internal ecology. Okay? But why take that as something about an evaluation of who you are, of how good a being you are? Yeah, as far as I can tell, should is purely a mechanism of using a shattered psyche and keeping it shattered and perhaps shattering it. It's a huge thing with children. Huge thing. I'm going to have a whole rant having to do with the way that we orient to children, because there's something about the nature of what I've been calling demons. I'll give a tantalizing hint here about demons specifically evolve to hunt and target children. There's a reason for that. There's a very important reason for that. And it absolutely shows up in our culture. Absolutely. Okay. So Daniel says, this of course excludes any bright desires for everyone else to be okay, as it takes that as an assumption. I mean, okay, so the point of that thought experiment of everyone and everything being okay is to remove the sense of obligation that you are supposed to do something to fix anything. I see you even say answer. This is because it's hard to disentangle from the other side. Yeah. You're just trying to remove the sense of obligation, the sense of should. Right. That's the basic issue. Okay. You're also trying to. It's really should across the board. You're trying to remove the should. what Albert Ellis, the father of what is now called cognitive behavioral therapy, although at the time he called it rational emotive therapy, which eventually became rational emotive behavioral therapy. He referred to this as masturbation, because you insist on how things must be. He loved creating colorful terms for things, it being very blunt. Um, he created a lot of opinions. But the whole point of that thought experiment is to create a little distance, to say, okay, what is wrong with me? Well, maybe there's something wrong with me. And what is wrong with me? Well, maybe I can earn my existence by saving the world. That was a big thing for me. And if I don't watch carefully, it shows up a lot too, because I think I have something that I think would be really good for the world. But if I'm trying to get my validation by putting my ideas out into the world, I just shattered my psyche. And then I'm not a manifestation. I'm distancing myself as a manifestation of the type of thing that I want to see occur in the world, which means that my communication can't be clear. So needing to save the world shatters the psyche. So noticing that and noticing, okay, well, all of that is screwed up. So how about I just set that aside so that I can tune into the feeling? That's the thing I'm trying to highlight. It's not about the thought experiment. It's about the feeling of bright desire. The sense of life is wonderful. What is the absolute most exquisite sensational part of falling in love? What is wonderful about the first bite of ice cream? Okay. Now, this is not about, oh, I have this sensation, and therefore this sensation is good. That's the mind babbling. There's something about what good means at a basic level. It's like the heart's language. How do you tune into that? If you can tune into that, that creates conscious integration with bright desire by becoming conscious of the sensation. Once you triangulate that sensation, then you can know these little glimmers of where it shows up in your life and where it's not there, where you're throwing in hours and hours and hours of work and you're very passionate about something, but if you reflect on it, you kind of go, I'm passionate, but it's more like a passionate fighting. And not to say fighting can't have bright desire, but very often I observe that people will fight for a cause or fight for an outcome, fight for a promotion. And the source of their energy is, it looks like a goal, but the purpose of the goal is to get away from a pain. The purpose of the goal is not because the process of working toward the goal and the achievement of the goal are both glorious, are both wonderful. How can you love life right now? What would feel wonderful right now? The goal is not the answers to that question. The goal is to track the feeling that comes with correct answers. Then you can contrast it with what is wrong with me. And the more you track this distinction and the more conscious you become of which one is driving you at any given moment, the more choice you have to create a coherent psyche and a coherent will, the ability to actually choose what you're doing with your life instead of just reacting all the time. And of course, it's on a spectrum. But for the most part, most of us, most of the time, if we don't intentionally cultivate this, are almost purely reactive. No, I'm not! So, that's the game. Just noticing those sensations. So adjust the thought experiments as you need to tune into that sensation. Okay. Yes, I'm wanting to wrap up soon. Getting an hour and a half into a planned hour is a bit much. But I see there's one more thing here. That grid sounds great. Yes, please. Yeah. So let me think about, do I want to jump into that right now? I would expect that to, in practice, take something like half an hour to do a good job. A bad job might be worse than no job in terms of affected outcome. But This is great and perfectly timed. Awesome. Um, so what I'm so here's what I'll do. I'll give you the seed of the idea, and you might be able to invent it on your own. And then I'm happy to do another live later on where we or a post. I'll have to think about what format I want to do here. But I'd like to give people a chance to engage with it because it's a practice. Right? It helps to light up something in your awareness, and a lot of people run into a bit of struggle when they first try. In part because we're not used to thinking about what we would love versus what we feel like we have to do. We're not very good at making those distinctions and coming up with a lot of examples. So walking through that and really coming up with examples and getting a very clear sense of what each of the 4 quadrants actually feels like. And also these 4 quadrants are made up, and remembering this is fake. The point is to point out our own experience. But the seed of the idea is one dimension has to do with how much do you like doing something? How much do you like the process of engaging in something? Okay. We often engage in things not because we enjoy doing them, but because we feel like we're supposed to. We also sometimes engage in things not because we enjoy, not because we enjoy doing them, but because we enjoy the result. And so we might dislike the process, but we work on it because we want the outcome. Okay, so that's one dimension to account for. There's an important contrast to track there versus the things that are just pleasurable for their own sake. And it's possible to enjoy things for their own sake that also produce the results that we want. And I claim that you can do this more and more and more the more coherent your psyche becomes. Okay, so that's one dimension. Another dimension is how fulfilled or energized do you feel as a result of having done it? Do you feel good after doing it? Do you feel drained after doing it? Okay, so as a quick example of that, a lot of people enjoy watching Netflix, or something like enjoy not watching Netflix. Sometimes people use Netflix in order to numb their emotions, to distract themselves from sensations they don't want to experience. I've been guilty of this too. Guilty. What's wrong with me? Like, I'm not free of that stuff. Not entirely. But it's kind of humorous now. It doesn't feel like it grips me quite so much. So the Netflix thing can be an avoidance, but sometimes it can be very pleasurable. But often, if I'm binge watching a show, if I spend like 5 hours watching some TV series on Netflix, in practice, that's usually because I'm avoiding a sensation. In practice, usually. But one hint about that is that afterwards, I feel bleh. I don't feel like I don't feel like my heart has just been deeply fed by a nurturing story, by a nutritious deliciousness, by soul food. I don't feel like my being sings the way I do after, like if I spend 5 hours reading an engrossing novel, like if it's really good and it's a really deep and rich story that speaks to the heart, often after that, I can come out of that feeling like I have just done something that feels magnificent for what it means to be alive. I feel energized, I feel beautiful. Right? Now, I can feel that way after watching 5 hours of Netflix, but usually I don't. So just noticing that distinction, and in particular, there's something very weird about tracking the type of things that I end up spending a lot of my time doing that I feel bad after having done them. Just noticing that. Okay, so that's the core seed of the idea, is just noticing those are 2 different dimensions to track things on. If you just do the most obvious 2x2 grid on those 2 dimensions, you can notice some things, I think. Now, there's a lot to say about the interaction that I've personally noticed about the grids, and it would be fascinating to see other people's interactions too. So I'll probably get into that some other time in more detail. But that's the seed to start with. Okay, so we're now 1 minute 34, oh God, 1 hour 34 minutes in. So I'd like to wrap up here. Yeah, so thank you all for coming, for taking a look, and for engaging, and for listening. Um, I find this really exciting because if the world could have, I don't need everybody to do this. I don't need anybody to do this, honestly. But I love, like Bright Desire, I love what the world could become if we could create more of a culture that orients around bright desire. And that doesn't even have to get everybody, it just has to get enough. Now, I enjoy this, and I enjoy sort of like a little bit impishly sort of going, oh, it feels like it sucks to be you. And it also sounds like you really care about this other thing over here. Like I enjoy pointing out the contrast between the what's wrong with me and the bright desire that I project on other people, and I like playing with it. It's fun. But part of the joy for me is in the possibility. What could we do if we really let our love of life organize how our minds work, how our interactions with each other work, how culture works? To me, that is really exciting. So thank you for listening. Thank you for choosing to be willing to potentially consider playing with this for yourself. And also, I would love to hear how this ends up working for you, what exciting things you end up finding. I don't have a really consistent way for you to contact me about that, but also, last time I saw, there's like 700 people who've been viewing each of the previous videos, so I don't want to get blasted with too much stuff all at once. But as you feel moved, well, I'll tell you what. If I get overwhelmed with messages, I'll just stop using Messenger. So you can shoot me a message on Messenger if there is some experience that you encounter that you would like to share with me, and or reply. Give a comment to the video here, just remembering to tag me because I don't see comments after the video is no longer live if I'm not tagged in the comment, or rather I don't get notified. But yeah, I would love to hear how this goes for you. Thank you so much for listening.